Hello and welcome to the Startup Operator podcast. I'm Roshan Karyappa. On this episode, I spoke to Ravi Ravulaparthi, who is the co-founder and CEO of Capita, that is a cap table and ESOP management platform. We covered Capita's fundraise on a previous episode of the Startup Operator Roundup, and Ravi and his team really liked our perspective. One thing led to another, and we got to do this episode. Ravi has been a banker and is intimately familiar with the ins and outs of the fundraising process and how it affects founders and other stakeholders. We spoke about some do's and don'ts with that, how one should manage their cap table, best practices with ESOPs and other related things. This was an insightful conversation on various aspects of finance and investing related to startups, and I'm sure you'll find this valuable, so do stick around. Hey Ravi, welcome to the Startup Operator podcast. Thank you so much for making the time.
Thanks, Roshan. Thanks for having me here.
Yeah, really looking forward to this conversation. So Ravi, you have an interesting background. You've been a finance professional and you've been at the other side of the table usually, right? Investing in startups and so on. What made you start Capita and what has that experience been like since?
Yeah, so for a large part of my career, I was a banker, actually on the same side as the founder, across the table from investors, and most of my career as a professional. But if you're a TMT banker and over 15 years, you would have seen so many interesting ideas. So that led to me dabbling a little bit in terms of becoming an angel investor. But most of my career, I've been on the side of entrepreneurs and founders, helping them find exits, raise capital, merge and acquire other companies, or get merged and acquired by other companies. So that's a little bit about my career. So, as I was thinking what I thought was a mid-career point and, having this urge to do something before I run out of insanity, the bee in the bonnet was every other part of a bank had got disrupted by technology. Payments, loans, deposits, wealth management, portfolios, investments, except the part of the bank that I worked in. So for me, this question was there: how will where I worked in finance, the area that I worked in finance, get disrupted by technology? And we saw certain aspects of it already getting automated in the developed markets in Silicon Valley and so on. And so this seemed like a large enough problem where we had the domain skills to build a tech solution. And so that's basically how this started. And I managed to actually get two great co-founders who shared this vision. So you can, and so we set out on that journey basically.
Right. So recently on the Startup Operator Roundup, we did, talk about your fundraise, and I jokingly mentioned it must have been interesting for you to pitch this solution to investors, right? So what was the initial reaction from them? I mean, it's a problem that they themselves would have encountered many times.
Yeah, absolutely. So we initially built a software. So given all, the founding team is a banker, an investor, and a technologist, each with about 15 to 20 years of experience. So we were all mid-career professionals, all kind of decided to change mid-course, except the technology professional who is now building a tech company as well, right? So in that context, when we actually met with, when we built a prototype initially and started testing it with customers and all that, we found that the ESOP problem was universally kind of acknowledged by founders, because employees come, employees go. Managing ESOPs impact finance, they impact accounts, they impact how you attract talent. So, entrepreneurs recognize the problem, identified with it, but investors identified with the cap table problem a lot more. Because if you're an analyst in a VC firm, if you're actually the one dealing with cap tables, messy cap tables, reporting requirements around cap tables. So the problem statement resonates very easily with investors. So in that sense, we didn't have too much of trouble explaining the problem to our investors that we spoke with.
Right. On that note, could you talk about some of the popular use cases that you're serving right now?
Yeah, so straight out of the box, we help people manage their cap tables. So the approach we take to cap table is, we take every transaction from inception of a company, If a cap table is nothing but a series of transactions, if all the transactions are right, the cap table is right. And that approach lends us to building the cap table in a way that can be sliced and diced differently, analyzed in different terms, run any scenarios that we want, and so on. So it's quite useful, for example, for a founder to think about two different term sheets and how to compare them and what does it mean in terms of dilution. It's also useful to kind of think about what the waterfall looks like, because you have all these instruments like convertible notes, warrants, CCPS, preferences, liquidation multipliers, and conversion ratios, and so have you. So all of those scenarios can be run on the system. So that's one use case. The second is ESOP management. ESOP is actually employee ownership, so therefore it should be connected to your cap table. It should reflect on your cap table in some form, and therefore the whole ESOP recording and management. That's the second use case. The third is actually digital issuance of ESOPs itself. Actually issue them on the system, record them on the system. Why do you need paper trails for all of this? You need to have records, but you don't need paper. And then the other use cases which we are building towards is how to automate valuation around many of these things, mark to market, fair market valuations, and some of those. And there we'll work with partners and in the ecosystem to kind of build those solutions. So three out of the box that you get straight out of the box are these three use cases.
Right. I'd love to touch upon all of them, but term sheets are something that founders have to wrap their heads around, right? I mean, one of those things that they have to very quickly understand, because they'll be dealing with that for the length of their company. So what are some common misconceptions within the term sheet, various things within the term sheet itself, and where have you seen founders really struggle or make mistakes?
See, at the end of the day, founders need to understand the term sheet they receive, right? There's no two ways around it. So we won't kind of say that we can automate, or we can help you understand every term sheet or every nuance out there. At the end of the day, it's a legal it's a document that will lead to a legal document. So you need to understand it fully. But where we can help is with the where our tool can help, and where we are seeing we can actually automate is around how to simulate a scenario and understand what it means. What does a option pool which is 10% on a post money basis created today on a pre money basis mean for the founder in terms of dilution? How much pool does it give him, and so on? Some of these things are not intuitive, and you can understand. The other things that are not intuitive is convertible notes or any instruments which are somewhere between debt and equity, right? All of those these are specialized terms, and you may be seeing it for the first time. And so if it is a standard safe, it's that much easier, right? If it's a safe or if it's a KISS document, it's standardized. But what we have seen in our part of the world for us is India and Southeast Asia. We actually see fairly customized and creative convertible notes, which means you will need to understand the nuances. So we've try to make our tool as comprehensive as possible, and that's where I think we can help with what we are building in terms of founders. But at the end of the day, that's one part of term sheet. There are so many other parts of the term sheet that any founder will have to kind of spend the time to understand. There's no
right. So it's a legal document. Maybe sit with a lawyer and then understand the consequences of everything, basically.
Yeah. Yes, what we are trying to automate is the whole finance element of it, the corporate finance element of it, and that we can do. But at the end of the day, there is legal terms in there, and therefore you need to understand that aspect as well. And that's, you can't yet automate some things. You can, anything that has a commercial financial implication, we can build tools that automate, but it's still a legal document. Yes.
Right. So, having seen the fundraise process up close, I understand it's very, very intense, right? Founders are told to budget anywhere between like 3 to 6 months or more for the whole routine. What are some key operational constraints and challenges in this fundraising exercise that you've seen?
So I wear two hats here. One in my past role as a banker, and what I have seen with fundraisers and helping companies in the later rounds in terms of larger capital raises. And then what my own experience as a founder has been in the two fundraisers that we have kind of undertaken so far. So on both counts, one is, I think it's always easier if you have built the conversation with an investor leading to a fundraise, and you're not facing them for the first time in the context of raising money, because that always helps with the from a tracking a particular potential investment over a period of time is always helpful. So I actually think if you want to be successful at continuous, and fundraising is a key element of success of a startup, so you actually kind of plan for your next fundraise when you're actually not fundraising, and be prepared and so on. So that is the one of the principles that both as a banker and both as a founder I would suggest. So that makes that 3-month to 6-month process a little bit shorter, because you're not kind of meeting someone for the first time and going through the whole courting process, which sometimes takes some time. So that I think is like takeaway for me. And the second one is really preparation, right? You actually underestimate how much time you have. A little window. There's a little bit of storytelling, there's a little bit of metrics, what you want to focus on and how you want to convey that message, both from a substance perspective and a form perspective, which is communication perspective. I think again, this is my banker hat speaking, it makes a difference in terms of how you can shorten it. So two elements. One is it's not instantaneous. It doesn't start on the day you have to do a fundraise soon. It has to happen from before. So build a relationship with potential investors for the next round early on. And second, there's an element of science to it. There's an element of art to anything, but there's an element of science to it.
Right. And I'm sure there are nuances that vary across the stage of funding itself, right? From seed to Series A, Series B to, again, growth stage rounds as well. So what are some typical nuances that you have noticed?
Yeah, it's a very early stage. It's about the team. So it's about the founding team. It's about the talent in the team, and so on. At the next stage, it's about product market fit. That's the usual thing. And when you're going for the big growth round, have you kind of expanded enough avenues to create a very large TAM? Comes into play. But one thing that is common all through is, are you actually playing in a market that's rising? Because from a VC perspective, a rising tide takes up all ships, and therefore that remains a constant theme throughout, irrespective of seed, Series A or Series C or D. The market factor, are you building in a market where there are so many market forces making this the right time? That is a little bit difficult for a founder to assess, but in the other three are like measurable kind of parameters.
Right. And we're seeing a lot of international investors showing interest in India as well, right? And let's say, startups as well expanding to Southeast Asia, US and beyond. This is common with the SaaS startups especially, right? So what are some of the things that happen in that case from a compliance or from a finance perspective, right? What are some things that you've noticed?
From outside investing into India, there are not, there are enough number of funds that have that. Any fund that is looking at a startup market in India, I think I don't think money from a compliance money flow perspective, there are too many constraints. To be very candid, not too many in Singapore, for that matter in Indonesia or India. There are nuances in terms of structures, how companies are held, what instruments and so on. But all of this is, so much capital has gone in. All of this is like well established. So I don't think there are constraints from that perspective. What we are seeing is a tremendous amount of interest into the Indian market, and I think you would know this as well as I do, how much VC interest is building up in the market, and it's also reflective, right? Any VC who tells me where do you think the private market is, my question to him usually would be, how big do you think your fund will be in 5 years? and most VCs would have very big plans for their own funds, because you've seen some giant private rounds of giant funds having been set up already in terms of addressing this particular market. And I say, by itself, India and Indonesia, given their demographics, will be very, very large startup markets. So we actually think there'll be 100,000 startups between India and Southeast Asia in 2027.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, literally one unicorn being born every 7 to 10 days, actually. I mean, so yeah. So
there was a week in April, I think, where there were more unicorns than the whole of 2013.
I think there were 6 unicorns or something of that sort. Yeah, I remember that. So, what are some best practices that you have seen on managing, various stakeholders who may end up on your cap table, right? So, founders, investors, advisors, employees, and so on. So, what are some best practices on those fronts?
Yeah. With respect to cap table, actually, for any founder, at least one of the founders needs to have a full understanding of what the cap table is. We are actually building. We are actually, our startup is about actually being organized from day one. So we, for example, on Capita, we would have a startup that has 2 founders and 2 employees, all the way to someone who has over 1,000 employees with equity compensation being managed on the system. So cap table is about ownership. Ownership is so fundamental to starting a company that it is better for you to stay organized from day one. And this is how quickly a cap table can become messy is underestimated. At the same time, as a founder, you're hungry for talent. You're selling. One of the key facets of an entrepreneur is to kind of sell the vision and build a team, right? And if you're selling the vision and building a team, often you're not able to compensate what market can compensate for the talent you want inside your company, and therefore you part with a little bit of ownership to create owners. And at the end of the day, you need to that ownership has to be reflected, and it has to the employee or the team that you're attracting should actually believe and understand and know what that ownership means for them. And therefore, we would actually advocate, very strongly for managing this on systems from day one. The nuances that are lost is often you kind of don't have a structured program. You think of a certain percentage of ownership and promise it to somebody. And we have seen this time and again, because early on, as a founder, you're trying to get the talent, and you sit across on a table on a coffee shop and you agree on some, equity-based compensation. So very soon, if you kind of do that too often, then you have unstructured, equity compensation part of your cap table. And sometimes even how you raise capital can be unstructured, though that is changing. It's becoming more and more structured, especially with accelerators and incubators coming into play. It's getting more structured on the cap table side.
Yeah, I think, founders and startups are becoming a lot more mature now, right? I mean, we have a ton of institutional knowledge. And I would say it wasn't like this even 7-8 years back, right? Or 6-7 years back. I mean, people are...
Totally agree with you on that, and much part of that goes to how much information is out there, so many resources for people to use, and then we are hoping that kind of gets that knowledge is replaced by systems as well. And once you have systems to manage some of these things, it should become more and more organized.
Correct. I think it becomes a lot more operational in that sense, right? I mean, there's a lot less ambiguity, right? And I
think you hit the nail on the head. The key word is ambiguity. It's about ownership of your company. You can't afford to have ambiguity of what the ownership is.
Absolutely.
And that's where understanding of what you're offering or what you're giving away and what you're getting in return is very important.
Right. So you referenced the magic 4-letter word in your previous answer, right? With ESOP, basically. And, we've seen plenty of buybacks this year, from Zomato to Swiggy to Urban Company to Unacademy. And there's like rising interest, right? I mean, finally, I think people have started to see this as a realizable asset, something that is of tangible value and not a pipe dream. But, there is a lot of ambiguity in this. It's usually a very opaque process, and there's distrust on both sides of the equation, and a lot of mismatched expectations as well. What are some best practices that you would advise a founder who's listening to this podcast in terms of issuing ESOPs, and what should they openly communicate about?
I think there are many aspects to this question. It's a great question. So we'll cover the key ones, the key aspects. One is it has to be transparent and it has to be on record. At the same time, and if I flip it to the employee side, the same point, don't be afraid to ask what your ESOP compensation actually means to you. Don't be afraid to ask questions like, what does it mean? When can I expect liquidity? Is there going to be a program? What's the intent? Right? You can't always promise a liquidity event as a founder, but what is going to drive this trend is, company remains private for a very long time. Especially in our part of the world, it remains private for a really long time. Like, the average time to IPO globally today is 12 years. So you can imagine what it will be in our part of the world, and where the public markets are not as liquid as they are in the US or in China, right? And therefore, if a company exists in a private form for, let's say, 12 to 16 years, and your typical ESOP vesting schedule is 4 years, this vested ESOP, what does it mean if you can't actually offer liquidity? And so, as talent, the fight for talent with these private companies becoming much larger, these startups which you mentioned early on are all very large companies. They have to fight for the same talent as a potentially listed company. And so, if I'm fighting for the same talent, how can I attract when one has 100% liquidity and one has 0% liquidity? Liquidity has to be on a continuum. So, I think this is the beginning of a very large trend. We're betting on it. And this will actually, as the startup ecosystem matures and this number of unicorns increase and the number of Soonicorns increase, it's only going to, this ESOP buyback programs will increase. We actually think there'll be structured liquidity programs as well. Some buyback happening every quarter. Why not? Right? If
Yeah.
and we are also advocating for things like, if salary gets a payslip, equity compensation should get an equity payslip. And we're building some equity payslip on the Capita system, because not only is first is distribution, how widely you give your ESOPs within your organization, that will change, and then buybacks, which is liquidity and monetization. And in between both of these is communication, how you engage and communicate the value proposition of your employee, a value proposition of your employee stock option plan to your employee. So I think when you think about it in that context, managing this on systems will kind of start making sense.
Yeah. No, you bring up a great point, right? Which is that, I mean, if you assume like 14 or 15 years even for an exit, right? And what does it mean to have a completely vested 4-year stock grant, right? I mean, because again, I mean, it's one of those things that I think people don't tend to think too much about as well. I would say, I mean, they're just happy that, there's at least paper value on thing, right? What are some things?
Paper value is great. It can only take you that far, right? If
Yeah.
ultimately you will create that employee retention, you'll create that employee loyalty if that means something. And
Correct.
therefore, we think they will be the liquidity. It's finance theory. It has to be on a continuum.
Right, right. And so, what are some things that employees should watch out for in any of these ESOP grants and everything, stock grants and everything?
See, I think there are two things. It depends on the stage of the company, of course. And so, if it's a mature company, I would say think about when the buyback would happen, what the liquidity event would be. Think of what's the cost of the option would be. Early on, cost it may not be that expensive. Later on, there is a cost of the option, and then the obvious the big thing is, from an employee perspective, is tax. So one is taxation. Should I exercise early or should I exercise later? Right? And there's a cost to exercise, and therefore it matters. But when you exercise, you actually there's a tax implication. And so, so one thing is first thing, like anything, like just what the equivalent of what I mentioned about a founder and term sheet. Employees should actually try and understand what the ESOP compensation is. I think it's something you should ask and you should understand and you should find out. And then if you flip it, if you're the CHRO or the HR lead of a company, you should put in all the effort to communicate this value proposition to your employees, and not just one time, but it's an engagement process with an employee over a period of time. So that understanding that, and then understanding what the financial implications of those are, and at a later stage in terms of what's the visibility to potential buyback or a liquidity or a monetization event. There's no you can't be shy about asking this of your employer if you're an employee.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Plenty of things that you've referenced in the conversation belongs to the realm of corporate finance, right? I mean, and finance is something that startups are typically, you won't have a founder with a background in finance, right? I mean, you either find a product guy or a salesperson and so on, and that's something that founders have to pick up and learn, right? Is there a particular time in a startup when, they have to prioritize building this sort of a finance function, corporate finance function, where people are managing all of these investor relations and stuff like that? And if so, what is the benefit of that?
I use a metaphor which I often use. This is, how you teach kids a concept. It's age appropriate. This thing, you have to teach any concept in an age appropriate manner, and it's never too early to teach a concept. It's never too late. It just has to be. So same analogy, at every stage you need to understand, and how deeply you need to understand this changes. In fact, early on, the founder actually himself or herself has to put in the effort to understand the ownership, because you don't have that much talent. And therefore, that burden in some sense is very early on with the founder. And at a later stage, while the founder still needs to understand the implication in terms of cap table, in terms of other nuances around how it impacts accounts, how it impacts taxation, how it might impact employee compensation, you may have experts, right? An HR expert comes in and a finance expert comes into your team at a later stage. So that onus is on the founder, and at an early stage with whoever is assisting him with these concepts. So it's important to get to understand them. There is no at every stage you'll need to understand, because the ownership starts from day one, right? You incorporate, you've created a cap table.
Yeah, no, this has been a fascinating conversation, Ravi. And what do you have upcoming for Capita itself? I mean, are there any new avenues that we should watch out for?
Yeah, one of the areas we are kind of we're doing some initial work. I mean, first, one of the things is we see that many startups in this part of the world, and it's India is one or two steps ahead in this matter. Why should any company have paper share certificates? You're doing away with currency. When you incorporate, why should anyone have paper-based share certificates? So we are asking that's one of the areas where we'll actually build solutions. You should have dematerialized shares or digital shares from day one. That's a logical extension to what we are building towards. But in the more immediate term, we're building solutions or systems for ESOP liquidity. We're also building some solutions for automating things around valuation, etc. So we'll assist the wider ecosystem, not just the founders and not just the founders, employees, and investors. How you report, how you account for some of these ESOP programs, and all of that can also be automated.
Right. I mean, you did reference valuation, so I have to ask, right? I mean, I would say, I mean, one of the changes we're also seeing is that a lot of liquidity chasing founders, right? I mean, early stage deals have increased tremendously, and today it's not common. I mean, it's not very uncommon for founders to have 2 or 3 term sheets for a, good idea, right? Not just an MVP or whatever, right? So, and there is this talk about valuations and stuff. So how should founders view valuations? Should they just go out and get the best that they can get? Or, I mean, should there be some other basis to evaluate that?
I mean, it's a that's a difficult one. It's in every case it's nuanced, but I think it's a balance between getting. I think the paramount for you is getting the right investor on board, because if you go for valuation as a trade-off against the right investor or the wrong investor at the stage of your company, then you may have a mismatch in terms of direction, and this is a marriage for the long term, and therefore it causes problems. But again, as a founder, if you're getting a very high valuation from two similar type of very different valuations from similar type of funds, then you would maximize what is best for your existing shareholders and your company. So valuation becomes an important concern, but it's not at the cost of getting the wrong investor onto your cap table.
And when you say right investor, I mean, what are some typical parameters that you would judge them by?
It's alignment with how you want to build, where the company goes through, you get that very early when you're having conversations with investors. Do they see your vision? Do they share your vision? How are they? Is the vision getting multiplied in that conversation, or is it getting diminished in a conversation? Is very easy to assess. And you can assess that from any conversation. Forget about an investor versus this. In any conversation, if the conversation is, contributing positively, and 1 + 1 is making greater than 2 or not. And that, I think, founders will have those instincts anyway. And you'll also have a judgment in terms of, over a series of interactions in terms of, is that investor adding positive energy or not? And that should help you in making those decisions. Again, this is not, I don't think I have figured this out fully myself yet. So I just want to be candid there.
Right. Okay. Closing thoughts. I mean, before we end the podcast, broad question to you, from an Indian startup founder perspective, what are you optimistic for going forward?
Yeah, I'm very optimistic for the startup ecosystem. There are 45,000 startups as per Startup India today in India. And that's, I told you about the 100,000 target. India alone contributes already to more than, 50% of that. The number of amount of funds, the size of the funds being raised, amount of deployments happening, the things we talked about, 6 unicorns within a week. These are all great for the Indian startup ecosystem, and not just for founders, right? It's that funding means that much talent gets developed, and Chennai is already a SaaS capital, and so you will start to build ecosystems around, Bangalore is a big hub. Chennai is a big hub. Gurgaon is becoming a big hub. So you will have more and more such hubs, and that's actually good for overall. We had great set of IT services companies come out of India when I just graduated from with my MBA, and now we have great product companies coming out of India, and that I think this will build the future. Basically, this will build the future for the whole startup ecosystem in India. And this is internet, this is SaaS, and there are many areas, right, where fintech.
Right. No, I think SaaS especially is a path out for people to convert from services to products. I think we have like a convergence on various things right now that that transition has become a lot more easier, and there's a proper playbook for that, I think.
Yeah, exactly. And also then talent development happens, right, in the overall market when you have that many more SaaS experienced engineers and product people and designers and so on. So all of that element comes in. I mean, design is such a key element of a product. And once you have product companies coming out, imagine how much of that product management design talent also becomes available.
Absolutely. So Ravi, this has been a fun conversation. Thank you so much for being on the podcast. I really appreciate your time, and hopefully, sometime we should do a deep dive on term sheet and other things separately for founders. Maybe do an AMA.
Absolutely. Look forward to more conversations. Thanks for having me today.
Thank you so much, Ravi.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening. If you liked this episode, then don't forget to subscribe to us on your favorite platform and share this episode with all of your fellow startup operators. Also, follow the Startup Operator on LinkedIn and Twitter for more updates. Stay safe, take care, and see you soon on a brand new episode of the Startup Operator.